Jake Morrison had been walking for 3 days across the burning sands of Kepler 442b when his legs finally gave out. The emergency beacon in his torn flight suit had stopped working 2 days ago, and his water supply was down to the last few drops. The twin suns of this alien world beat down on him without mercy, turning the desert into a furnace that seemed designed to kill anything foolish enough to walk its surface. His transport ship had crashed somewhere behind him, a twisted wreck of metal and broken dreams. Jake had been the only survivor out of 12 crew members, and even that felt like a cruel joke now. What was the point of surviving a crash if you were just going to die slowly in the desert anyway? The mining colony he had been heading to was supposed to be only 50 kilometers from the crash site, but Jake had lost his navigation equipment in the wreck. The sand beneath him was made of tiny, crystal fragments that cut into his skin with every step. His uniform was torn in a dozen places, and blood had dried on his arms and face. The alien landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by strange rock formations that looked like frozen lightning bolts reaching toward the sky. There was no sign of life anywhere, no plants, no animals, nothing but sand and rock and the merciless heat of the twin suns. Jake tried to push himself up from the sand one more time, but his arms shook and he collapsed again. This was it then. This was how Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison of the Earth Space Navy would die, alone on a world whose name most humans could not even pronounce. He closed his eyes and tried to think of home, of the green hills of Montana where he had grown up, of his sister Amy who would never know what happened to him. The sound of footsteps on crystal sand made him open his eyes. At first he thought he was hallucinating from the heat, but the figure approaching him was real enough. It was tall and thin, with skin that looked like blue glass and eyes that glowed with a soft inner light. The being moved with a grace that seemed impossible, its feet barely touching the ground as it glided across the sand. Jake had seen pictures of Zephyrians before, but never one in person. They were an ancient race, older than humans by thousands of years, and they had made it very clear that they wanted nothing to do with other species. The mining rights to this world had been negotiated through automated systems, and human miners were strictly forbidden from making contact with the native population. The Zephyrian stopped a few feet away from Jake and studied him with those glowing eyes. Jake could see his own reflection in the creature's crystalline skin, and he looked terrible. His face was burnt red from the sun, his lips were cracked and bleeding, and his eyes were sunk deep in his skull. He probably looked like death itself. Jake tried to speak, but only a croak came out. The Zephyrian tilted its head to one side, and Jake realized it was female. There was something about the way she moved, the way she held herself, that reminded him of his grandmother. The thought was ridiculous, but it was there anyway. The Zephyrian woman reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out a small container made of the same crystalline material as her skin. She knelt beside Jake and carefully lifted his head, bringing the container to his lips. Cool water flowed into his mouth, and Jake drank greedily. It tasted like nothing he had ever experienced before, clean and pure and somehow alive. When the container was empty, the Zephyrian woman stood up and looked around the desert. She seemed to be thinking about something, and Jake wondered if she was going to leave him here to die. It would make sense from her perspective. Humans were considered dangerous by most alien species, and the Zephyrians had particular reason to fear them. There had been border disputes between human colonies and Zephyrian territories for years, but instead of leaving, the woman bent down and slipped her arms under Jake's shoulders. She was stronger than she looked as she lifted him from the sand, with surprising ease. Jake wanted to protest, to tell her he was too heavy, but he did not have the strength to speak. The woman began walking across the desert, carrying him like he weighed nothing at all. The journey to the Zephyrian settlement took 2 hours, and Jake drifted in and out of consciousness for most of it. When he was awake, he watched the strange landscape pass by. The rock formations became more frequent as they walked, and Jake realized they were not natural formations at all. They were buildings, structures made from the same crystalline material as the Zephyrian skin. The entire settlement seemed to grow out of the desert floor like a garden of glass and light. The woman carried him to a small building near the center of the settlement. Other Zephyrians watched them pass, their glowing eyes following Jake's progress with obvious concern. Some of them spoke to the woman in their musical language, and Jake could tell they were not happy about what she was doing. The woman answered them in calm, measured tones, but she did not stop walking inside the building. The woman laid Jake on a soft surface that felt like silk but looked like woven crystal. The interior was cool and peaceful, with walls that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Strange symbols covered the walls, and Jake realized he was in some kind of medical facility. The woman began tending to his wounds with instruments that looked like they were made of pure light. She cleaned the cuts on his arms and face with a liquid that tingled but did not hurt. She gave him more water and something that might have been food, though it tasted like nothing Jake had ever eaten before. It was sweet and satisfying, and he felt strength returning to his body with every bite. For the next several days, the woman cared for Jake around the clock. She changed his bandages, brought him food and water, and monitored his recovery with devices that hummed softly in the crystalline walls. She did not speak to him, but she did not need to. Her actions spoke louder than any words could have. Jake learned that her name was Veltar, and that she was one of the settlement's healers. She was old, even by Zephyrian standards, with skin that had turned almost white with age. The other Zephyrians treated her with deep respect, but Jake could see that they were worried about her decision to help him. As Jake grew stronger, he began to understand just how much Veltar had risked by saving him. The Zephyrians were a dying race, their population dwindling with each passing year. Their world was running out of the crystal formations that sustained their life force, and they had barely enough resources to sustain themselves. By helping Jake, Veltar was using supplies that her own people desperately needed, yet she continued to care for him without complaint, showing him a kindness that Jake had never experienced from his own species. It was a kindness that would change everything. 2 weeks after Veltar had saved his life, Jake Morrison finally managed to repair his emergency communicator using parts from the Zephyrian settlement. The device crackled to life with static, and then Jake heard the most beautiful sound in the universe, a human voice. Admiral Lisa Carter's voice came through the speaker, worried and urgent, asking for his status and location. Jake could have simply requested immediate extraction. He could have told the Admiral that he was alive and needed rescue, nothing more. But as he sat in Veltar's crystalline dwelling, watching the ancient healer tend to other members of her dying community, Jake made a choice that would echo across the galaxy. Instead of just calling for help, Jake sent a detailed report to Earth Command. He described not only his rescue, but everything he had learned about the Zephyrians during his recovery. He told them about Veltar's incredible kindness, about how she had used her people's precious resources to save a stranger from a species they had every reason to fear. He explained how the Zephyrians were facing extinction, their crystal formations failing, their population dwindling, their world slowly dying around them. The response from Earth Command was immediate but predictable. Admiral Carter ordered Jake to avoid further contact with the natives and prepare for extraction. The official policy was clear. Humans were not to interfere in alien affairs, especially not with species as isolationist as the Zephyrians. But Jake's report had already been logged in the military database, and within hours it had been copied and shared throughout the human fleet. Captain Ben Rodriguez was commanding a cargo vessel called the New Hope when he received an unofficial copy of Jake's report. Ben had been in the Space Navy for 20 years, and he had seen his share of alien species. Most of them viewed humans as aggressive expansionists, and Ben had always accepted that as the price of humanity's rapid spread across the galaxy. But something about Jake's story struck him differently. Ben read the report 3 times, focusing on the details about Veltar's sacrifice. An old alien woman had risked everything to save a human stranger, asking nothing in return. The idea kept circling in Ben's mind as he went about his duties, transporting supplies between human colonies. When his ship reached the way station at Proxima Centauri, Ben made a decision that would get him court-martialed. If his superiors found out, Instead of following his assigned route to the mining colony on Titan 7, Ben diverted the New Hope toward Kepler 442b. His cargo hold was full of medical supplies and food synthesizers meant for the Titan colony, but Ben figured they could wait. The Zephyrians needed help now, and Ben was in a position to provide it. The journey to Kepler 442b took 3 days at maximum warp. During that time, Ben sent encrypted messages to other ship commanders he trusted, sharing Jake's report and his own plans. The response surprised him. Captain Mary Johnson of the medical vessel Mercy volunteered to join him, bringing advanced medical equipment and a team of xenobiologists. Lieutenant Commander Steve Davis diverted his supply ship from its route to rendezvous with Ben's flotilla. By the time Ben reached Kepler 442b, he had been joined by 6 other vessels. Word of their mission had spread through the human fleet. Like wildfire transmitted through unofficial channels and personal networks, Dr. Amanda Foster, a renowned expert in alien biology, had abandoned her research station on Mars to join the mission. Engineer Tony Blake had convinced his entire construction crew to volunteer, bringing terraforming equipment that might help stabilize the Zephyrian crystal formations. When the small human fleet entered orbit around Kepler 442b, the Zephyrian response was immediate confusion. Their ancient sensors detected the approaching ships, and the Settlements Council convened an emergency session. For 1,000 years, the Zephyrians had maintained their isolation, avoiding contact with other species. Now they faced a fleet of human vessels, and they had no idea what to expect. Jake Morrison served as the intermediary, translating between the humans and Zephyrians with Veltar's help. The old healer had learned some basic human words during Jake's recovery, and Jake had picked up enough Zephyrian to manage simple conversations. Together, they explained to the confused council that the humans had come to help, not to conquer or exploit. The Zephyrian council was bewildered. Never in their recorded history had another species offered aid without demanding something in return. Council leader Zenkai questioned the humans' motives repeatedly, unable to comprehend altruism on such a scale. But Veltar spoke in favor of the humans, describing Jake's character and the genuine concern she had seen in his eyes. When he learned of her people's plight, Dr. Foster was the first to beam down to the planet's surface, accompanied by a small team of xenobiologists and medical specialists. She spent hours examining the failing crystal formations that sustained Zephyrian life, taking readings and samples while Veltar watched nervously. The ancient healer had never seen technology like the humans possessed, and she was amazed by their sophisticated instruments. Within days, the human ships had established a medical station near the Zephyrian settlement. Dr. Foster and her team worked around the clock, analyzing the crystal formations and developing theories about their deterioration. Engineer Blake began construction of atmospheric processors, designed to slow the planet's environmental decline. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Human medics worked alongside Zephyrian healers, sharing knowledge and techniques despite the language barrier. Human engineers collaborated with Zephyrian builders, combining advanced technology with ancient wisdom. Children from both species played together in the settlement's crystal gardens, their laughter echoing through the crystalline corridors. Captain Rodriguez coordinated the relief effort from orbit, managing supply drops and communications with Earth Command. The official response from human leadership was mixed, with some officials condemning the unauthorized mission while others quietly supported it. Public opinion, however, was overwhelmingly positive once news of the rescue mission reached civilian networks. Jake Morrison found himself at the center of it all, no longer just a crash survivor but an accidental ambassador. His daily reports to Earth Command documented the growing cooperation between humans and Zephyrians, and these reports were broadcast across human space. The sight of human children playing with young Zephyrians, of human engineers working alongside crystalline builders, captured imaginations throughout the human colonies. The ripple effect continued to spread. More ships arrived each day, bringing supplies and volunteers. The cargo vessel Stardancer brought water purification systems. The hospital ship Healing Light brought advanced medical equipment. Independent traders diverted from their routes, To deliver food and materials, word of humanity's unprecedented aid to the Zephyrians began to spread beyond human space. Other species monitored the transmissions with growing curiosity. The Centauri Republic, humanity's longtime rivals, initially dismissed it as political theater. But as weeks passed and the aid continued without any apparent benefit to humanity, even the Centaurians began to question their assumptions. The galaxy was watching, and what they saw challenged everything they thought they knew about the human species. 3 months after the human fleet had arrived at Kepler 442b, the entire galaxy was talking about what humanity was doing. The story had spread through the vast network of alien communication systems like a virus, jumping from species to species. With each retelling, on the waterworld of Aquatica Prime, the Nautolan Council gathered in their deep-sea chambers to discuss the strange reports coming from human space. The aquatic beings had always considered surface dwellers to be primitive and violent, but the images they were seeing challenged everything they believed. Ambassador Kralanen of the Centauri Republic stood before the Galactic Federation Council. On the neutral station of Harmony Point, his scaled face twisted with confusion. For decades, the Centaurians had positioned themselves as the civilized alternative to human expansion, painting humanity as a species of conquerors who took what they wanted by force. Now he was forced to explain why humans were giving away their resources to help a species that could offer nothing in return. The insectoid representatives of the Hive Collective buzzed among themselves in their complex harmonic language, trying to understand the concept of altruism without evolutionary advantage. Their queen had sent her finest analysts to study the human behavior on Kepler 442b, but their reports made no sense from a biological standpoint. Why would humans expend energy and resources to help a dying species that posed no threat and offered no benefit? Dr. Sarah Williams had become something of a celebrity throughout the galaxy, though she did not know it yet. The human scientist had made a breakthrough in understanding Zephyrian crystal biology, developing a process to stabilize their failing life support systems. Her work was being studied by xenobiologists from dozens of species, all trying to understand how humans had solved in months what the Zephyrians had struggled with for centuries. The breakthrough had come when Sarah realized that the Zephyrian crystals were not just mineral formations but living organisms in their own right. They formed a symbiotic relationship with the Zephyrians, providing life energy in exchange for certain chemical compounds produced by Zephyrian metabolism. As the planet's environment changed, the crystals were slowly dying, taking the Zephyrians with them. Sarah's solution was elegant in its simplicity. She developed a synthetic nutrient mixture that could feed the crystals, keeping them healthy and stable. The process required regular maintenance and monitoring, but it was well within human technological capabilities. More importantly, Sarah had shared her research freely with the Zephyrians, teaching them how to maintain the system themselves. The implications rippled through the scientific communities of every major species. The Valderon Empire, known for their advanced crystal technology, sent a delegation to study Sarah's work. The machine intelligence of the synthetic collective transmitted requests for detailed technical specifications. Even the mysterious energy beings of the void, who rarely communicated with physical species, sent resonance patterns that their translators interpreted as expressions of interest. Colonel Mike Johnson had organized the largest humanitarian convoy in human history, a fleet of 200 ships carrying supplies to sustain the Zephyrian population for decades. The convoy included everything from medical equipment to food synthesizers, from atmospheric processors to educational materials. Human volunteers from across the galaxy had contributed to the effort, donating supplies and expertise without any expectation of reward. The convoy's arrival at Kepler 442b was broadcast live across the galaxy, and the images were stunning. Ship after ship descended from orbit, their cargo holds filled with hope and compassion. Zephyrian children watched in wonder as human engineers assembled massive life support systems that would ensure their survival for generations to come. The sight of two species working together in perfect Harmony challenged every assumption about interspecies relations. Jake Morrison had become an unofficial ambassador between humanity and the galaxy. His daily reports from Kepler 442b were now being translated into hundreds of languages and broadcast to billions of beings across known space. Jake documented the growing friendship between humans and Zephyans, showing how two very different species could find common ground in their shared desire to protect life. The reports were having an unexpected effect on other species. The Theronian Confederacy, a collection of warrior clans that had remained neutral in galactic politics, began questioning their own isolationist policies. If humans could show such compassion to strangers, perhaps there was more to interspecies cooperation than they had previously believed. The Aquate Nautolans were the first to break with tradition. Queen Titalara announced that she was sending the first Nautilan diplomatic mission to Earth in over 3 centuries. The announcement shocked the galactic community, as the Nautilans had always maintained that surface dwellers were too primitive for meaningful contact. But the Queen's message was clear. Humanity's actions on Kepler 442b had proven that intelligence and compassion could exist in any environment. The synthetic collective's response was even more surprising. The machine intelligences had always viewed biological species as inefficient and illogical, but humanity's care for the Zephyrians demonstrated a form of logic that transcended simple survival calculations. The collective's prime node transmitted a message to Earth's leadership, expressing what their translators called algorithmic appreciation for human compassion. Even the enigmatic Void Walkers, beings of pure energy who existed between dimensions, began showing interest in human activities. Their rare communications with physical species increased dramatically, and xenolinguists detected patterns in their transmissions that suggested curiosity about human emotional responses. The transformation was most evident in the younger generation of alien species. Young Centaurians began questioning their parents' teachings about human aggression. Nautilan students started learning human languages, eager to understand the species that had shown such unexpected depth. Hive collective drones began displaying individual behaviors that puzzled their queens, as if exposure to human altruism was awakening something like individual consciousness. The Galactic Federation Council found itself facing unprecedented pressure to revise its policies toward humanity. Ambassador Velenas of the Ethereal Communion, one of the oldest and most respected species in the galaxy, stood before the assembly and delivered a speech that would be remembered for generations. She spoke of how humanity's actions on Kepler 442b had revealed a truth that the galaxy had forgotten, that true strength came not from conquest or domination, but from the willingness to protect and nurture life in all its forms. The speech was broadcast across the galaxy, and its impact was immediate. Species that had maintained strict isolation for millennia began opening their borders. Trade routes that had been closed for centuries reopened. The University of Cosmic Sciences announced the first interspecies research program in galactic history, with human scientists invited to work alongside alien researchers on Kepler 442b. Veltar watched the transformation with wonder. The ancient healer had never imagined that her simple act of compassion toward a dying human stranger would lead to such changes. As she tended to her patients in the new medical facility built by human engineers, she reflected on the mysterious ways that kindness could spread across the universe, touching lives in ways that no one could predict or control. The massive war fleet of the Vortic Empire emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of deadly insects, their black ships bristling with weapons and armor. Emperor Grax had been watching the events on Kepler 442b with growing annoyance, and he had finally decided to act. The mineral-rich world would make an excellent addition to his empire, and he saw no reason why a dying species and their human protectors should stand in his way. General Chris Norton was commanding the human defense fleet when the Vortak arrived, but he was not prepared for what happened next. As the enemy ships took up attack positions around the planet, new vessels began appearing from every direction. Centauri Republic battle cruisers dropped out of hyperspace, their sleek hulls gleaming in the light of the twin suns. Nautilan submarine ships rose from the planet's few bodies of water, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. The Hive Collective had sent 3 of their massive fortress ships, each one carrying thousands of warrior drones. The insectoid vessels moved with perfect coordination, positioning themselves between the Vortak fleet and the planet's surface. Even the mysterious energy beings of the void had responded, their shimmering forms creating defensive barriers around the most vulnerable settlements. Emperor Grax stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In 3 decades of conquest, he had never encountered anything like this. Individual species might fight desperately to defend their own worlds, but this was different. Dozens of species from across the galaxy had come together to protect a single dying world and its human defenders. The concept was so alien to Vortak thinking that Grax initially assumed it was some kind of elaborate trap. The first shots were fired by the Vortak, as expected. Their plasma cannons lit up the space around Kepler 442b, targeting the closest human vessels. But something unprecedented happened. A Centauri battlecruiser moved directly into the path of the enemy fire, taking the hits meant for a human medical ship. The Centauri vessel's shields flared and buckled, but it held its position, protecting the smaller human craft. General Norton watched in amazement as the battle unfolded. The Allied fleet moved with a coordination that seemed impossible for such diverse species. Nautilus ships darted between the heavier vessels, their bioelectric weapons disrupting Vortak targeting systems. Hive Collective drones swarmed around. Enemy fighters, their individual sacrifice protecting the larger ships. Human vessels provided covering fire for alien allies, their crews working with beings they had never fought alongside before. The Vortak had expected to face scattered resistance from individual species, each fighting for their own interests. Instead, they found themselves confronting a united defense force that seemed to anticipate their every move. When Vortak fighters targeted human transports, Centauri interceptors appeared to drive them off. When enemy bombers tried to reach the planet's surface, Nautilus bioships rose to meet them, their crews willing to die to protect a world that was not their own. Emperor Grax had built his empire on the principle that all species were ultimately selfish, that unity was impossible between beings with different interests and motivations. But the Battle of Kepler 442b was proving him wrong with every passing minute. He watched his carefully planned assault fall apart as the Allied fleet demonstrated a level of cooperation that his military advisors had insisted was impossible. The turning point came when a Vortak battleship managed to break through the defensive line and began targeting the Zephyrian settlements directly. The massive vessel's weapons could obliterate the crystalline structures in minutes, wiping out thousands of years of Zephyrian civilization. But before the battleship could fire, something extraordinary happened. A human destroyer, the USS Liberty, moved directly between the Vortak battleship and the planet's surface. The ship was far too small to survive a direct hit from the enemy's main guns, but Captain Ellen Ross did not hesitate. She ordered her crew to maintain position and began broadcasting on all frequencies, calling for backup. The message was simple: they would not let the Zephyrians die on their watch. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every ship in the Allied fleet, regardless of species or origin, began converging on the Vortak battleship. Centauri battle. Cruisers fired their quantum torpedoes while Nautilus bioships released swarms of living missiles. Hive Collective drones coordinated their attacks with human fighters, their combined firepower overwhelming the enemy vessel's defenses. The Vortak battleship was destroyed in a matter of minutes, but the real impact was felt throughout the galaxy. The image of a human destroyer willingly sacrificing itself to protect an alien world, and the sight of dozens of species rushing to its aid, was broadcast across known space. The message was clear: the age of isolated species fighting only for themselves was over. Emperor Grax realized that his empire was facing something it had never encountered before. This was not just a military alliance, but a fundamental shift in how species related to each other. The Vortak had built their power on dividing their enemies, playing one species against another. But the unity displayed at Kepler 442b could not be broken by traditional tactics. The final blow came when the energy beings of the void manifested in physical form for the first time in recorded history. Their glowing forms surrounded the remaining Vortex ships, and their telepathic message was felt by every living being in the system. They spoke of the ancient connections between all life, of the bonds that united every species in the galaxy. The Vortex warriors, trained from birth to show no mercy, found themselves overwhelmed by emotions they had never experienced. The battle ended not with a great explosion, but with a moment of perfect silence. The Vortex fleet, faced with unity they could not understand or defeat, began to withdraw. Emperor Grax's final transmission to the Allied fleet was brief. "We do not understand what you have become, but we will not stand against it." As the enemy ships disappeared into hyperspace, the Allied fleet remained in orbit around Kepler 442b. Ships from dozens of species floated side by side, their crews united by something stronger than any military alliance. They had proven that cooperation was not just possible but powerful beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. General Norton opened a communication channel to all ships, his voice carrying across the mixed fleet of humans and aliens. He spoke of the courage they had all shown, of the bonds they had forged in battle, and of the new future they were building together. The message was translated into dozens of languages, but the meaning was universal. They had become something greater than the sum of their parts. On the planet's surface, Jake Morrison stood with Veltar in the Crystal Gardens, watching the Allied fleet celebrate their victory. The old healer placed a translucent hand on his shoulder and spoke in her musical voice. She told him that her simple act of compassion had grown into something wonderful, something that would change the galaxy forever. Jake nodded, understanding that they had all become part of something much larger than themselves. 5 years had passed since Veltar first carried a dying human across the crystal sands of Kepler 442b, and the galaxy was no longer the same place. The anniversary of Jake Morrison's rescue had become a celebration known throughout the civilized worlds as Unity Day, marking the moment when compassion had triumphed over fear and suspicion. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the new Galactic Humanitarian Corps headquarters, watching ships from dozens of species dock at the massive space station orbiting Kepler 442b. The station had been built through the combined efforts of every major civilization in the galaxy, a symbol of what could be accomplished when beings work together toward a common goal. Centauri engineers had designed the structure, Nautolan biotechnicians had grown the living components, and human construction crews had assembled it all with help from Hive Collective drones. The Galactic Humanitarian Corps had grown from Jake's simple idea into the largest peacekeeping and aid organization in known space. Every species contributed according to their abilities, and every species benefited from the protection and assistance the Corps provided. When the plague struck the mining colonies of Rigel 7, Nautolan medical ships had been the first to respond. When the solar storms threatened the crystal cities of the ethereal communion, human atmospheric processors had saved millions of lives. Dr. Rachel Green walked through the archives of the new intergalactic university, documenting the changes that had swept across the galaxy. The university had been built in the crystal canyons of Kepler 442b, its classrooms and laboratories carved from the living rock with techniques shared by all the member species. Students from every corner of the galaxy came here to learn, their diverse forms filling the corridors with a symphony of languages and cultures. Rachel's research had shown that the transformation went far deeper than anyone had initially realized. Crime rates had dropped across the galaxy as species learned to resolve conflicts through cooperation rather than violence. Trade had increased dramatically as former enemies became partners. Scientific discoveries were accelerating as researchers shared knowledge freely across species barriers. The Compassion Accords had been signed exactly 1 year after the Battle of Kepler 442b, establishing new principles for interspecies relations, based on mutual aid and understanding. The signing ceremony had taken place in the Crystal Amphitheater on the planet's surface, with representatives from every major civilization in attendance. Even the Vortek Empire had sent an observer, though Emperor Grax himself had remained conspicuously absent. The Accords established the right of all sentient beings to receive aid in times of crisis, regardless of their species or political affiliation. They created frameworks for sharing technology and resources across species boundaries. Most importantly, they recognized that the strength of the galaxy lay not in the power of individual species but in their willingness to support each other. Veltar had lived to see the transformation her kindness had created, though she was now ancient even by Zephyrian standards. The old healer had become something of a legend throughout the galaxy, her story told to children of every species as an example of how small acts of kindness could change the universe. She had been invited to speak at the Earth Assembly, the first non-human ever granted that honor. Her words to the assembled human leaders had been simple but profound, translated into hundreds of languages and broadcast across the galaxy. She spoke of the crystal resonance that connected all Zephyrians to each other, and how she had learned that the same kind of resonance connected all living beings. When one being suffered, all beings felt the echo. When one being experienced joy, that joy rippled outward to touch countless lives. The crystal cities of Kepler 442b had become the most visited destination in the galaxy, their gleaming spires rising from the desert like frozen music. Pilgrims from every species came to see where the transformation had begun, to walk the same sands where Jake Morrison had nearly died and Veltar had chosen compassion over caution. The cities had grown beyond their original boundaries, incorporating architectural styles from dozens of civilizations into a harmonious whole. Captain Ben Rodriguez had been promoted to admiral and placed in charge of the humanitarian fleet, a collection of vessels from every major species dedicated to providing aid wherever it was needed. The fleet had responded to natural disasters, refugee crises, and humanitarian emergencies across the galaxy. Ben often said that his decision to divert the New Hope to Kepler 442b had been the best command decision of his career. The younger generation had embraced the new reality with enthusiasm that amazed their elders. Human children played with Zephyrian younglings in the crystal gardens, their laughter echoing through the translucent corridors. Centauri teenagers learned Nautolan poetry, while Hive Collective drones discovered the concept of individual identity through interaction with other species. The barriers that had divided the galaxy for millennia were crumbling before the simple power of friendship. Dr. Sarah Williams had established the Institute for Interspecies Biology, where researchers from across the galaxy work together to understand the fundamental connections between all forms of life. Her breakthrough with the Zephyrian crystals had led to discoveries that revolutionized medicine throughout the galaxy. Diseases that had plagued individual species for centuries were being cured through the application of techniques learned from other forms of life. The Galactic Federation had transformed from a loose collection of suspicious species into a true cooperative alliance. The old headquarters on Harmony Point had been abandoned in favor of a rotating system, with the capital moving between different worlds every few years. This ensured that every species felt included in the democratic process and that no single civilization could dominate the others. Emperor Grax of the Vortek Empire had finally been forced to acknowledge the new reality. His attempts to maintain the old ways of conquest and domination had failed repeatedly as target species received aid from their galactic neighbors. The Vortek military machine, built for fighting isolated enemies, proved ineffective against coordinated resistance. Grax had reluctantly signed a non-aggression pact with the Galactic Federation, though he still refused to join the Compassion Accords. As Jake Morrison watched the celebration of Unity Day from his office window, he reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all to this point. It had begun with one elderly alien choosing to save a dying human stranger, and it had ended with billions of beings choosing to save each other from the darkness of isolation and fear. The galaxy had learned that compassion was not weakness, but the strongest force in the universe, capable of binding together the most unlikely allies and creating bonds that could withstand any test. The age of isolated species was truly over, replaced by an era of cooperation and mutual support that promised to last for generations to come. In her small dwelling in the Crystal City, Veltar continued her work as a healer tending to patients. From dozens of species with the same gentle care she had shown to a dying human 5 years earlier. She often told her patients that every act of kindness created ripples that spread across the universe, touching lives in ways that no one could predict or control. The galaxy had become proof of that simple truth.